So we are well into Preptober. It is October 24th. I'm weirdly in Florida, so I don't feel very fall-like, but that doesn't mean that the march towards NaNoWriMo is fast approaching. And if you happen to be struggling in your Preptober, this is the video for you, because I am going to take many pieces of popular writing advice and give you alternative pieces of advice that might be more helpful instead. So we're gonna dive right into it. All right, here we go. The first one is characters. So you might have heard, make sure you list out your character's personality traits. Sometimes people will have those charts where you have, all the characters one after the other, and then you list you describe your character's personality in one of the columns there. Maybe, when I was first writing, I would list out everything my character was. They were smart, they were daring, they were sneaky, kind, greedy, whatever. I created these long lists of traits, and then I would start writing my book. And when I went back to look at the traits, I realized the character wasn't really exhibiting any of those. So instead of a long list of traits to describe your character, try identifying just 3. You can think of these like 3 brush strokes on a page, giving the scaffolding of who your character is. And ideally, the combination of traits should be unexpected. Maybe the character is rule-following, people-pleasing, and ambitious. Maybe the character is brash, strategic, and dutiful. You can see where those traits might conflict. For someone to be ambitious, but also rule-following, what happens when, to get what they want, they might have to break some rules, or they might have to make people not pleased with them. It makes it very interesting. It's kind of a contradiction of traits. Interesting people, because most people are kind of contradictory. So my advice is to list out the way these traits could come across in scenes, rather than listing the traits themselves. So you have 3 traits, and I've done this before. This works for me, it might work for you. So list out the ways these 3 traits could come across in scenes. So a rule-following main character might consistently decide to follow societal expectations. They might, if they're choosing between one thing or another, they'll go with the one that seems more in line with what they're supposed to do. They might snottily inform someone that they're breaking the rules, or they might tattletale. A brash character might speak over others or take immediate action without thinking it through when they receive bad news. Anyways, when you're writing these traits, or once you've written them and the possible ways they manifest themselves, you can think of 3 sort of questions. The first one is, where did the trait come from? So where did the MC learn that rule following was important? Or where did they learn to think strategically? The second one is, where do these traits come into conflict? So what happens when our ambitious rule follower must break the law to get what she wants? And number 3, what are the limits of the trait? So sure, someone might be calm and level-headed, but there is a time where everyone is going to panic. It might not be the same situation. Maybe someone can stare down a gun, but they can't deal with someone crying. So when do they reach their limit? A character might be kind, but what would make them bite someone's head off? Now, before I keep going, I have a lot more alternative piece of advice here. Just wanted to let you know that all of this is written out on my Substack, which you can find a link to below. You subscribe so you get an email once a month, but I put articles out there more frequently than that, mostly to complement my videos. There's behind the scenes content. It's really fun over there. It's all free, so check it out. The next piece of advice we're tackling is make a timeline of your character's life up until the story begins. I have seen a lot of people do this. At 5, they moved. At 6, they learned how to ride a bike. But sometimes the more detail that I have, the more overwhelming and unfocused my story can feel. It might be important that my character switched schools when they were 7. It might not. It depends on the story I'm trying to tell and what effect that might have had on them. So instead of a timeline of their entire life, I suggest trying Lisa Cron's origin scene strategy from Story Genius. So in this, she suggests writing 3 scenes from your character's past that help you understand the character's worldview, motivation, and most importantly, their misbelief. So most characters that change have some sort of misbelief about themselves, about the world, that is sort of challenged throughout the story, and then the change is they change the misbelief. Story Genius is an amazing book. You should read it if you haven't. But the idea is that you write the one scene that was the origin of this misbelief, and 2, where that misbelief was reinforced. These scenes probably won't be in your book, they're just for you, but they might be. One of my reinforcement scenes is in my book at a very critical moment. For example, one of my characters believes that her value comes only from her achievements and what she's doing. It originated when she had a performance at a music recital that made her parents forget that they were fighting and give their full attention to her. It was reinforced when her mentor kind of fired her after she performed badly in an audition. The next piece of advice we're tackling is ensure your characters have quirks so they stand out in the reader's mind. This is also, quirk is kind of on the same line of like a character tag, and this advice, like all advice, is meant with the best intentions. It's something like a description, a word, a ritual, a tick, or a trait that's associated with a character in order to distinguish them. This is a great writing technique. It helps readers keep characters straight, and you can usually identify them. Think of your favorite stories and they'll kind of come to you. It should come to you pretty quickly. Like it should be quick. Six of Crows, Jesper is daring and quick to shoot. He has his guns. Inez is the Wraith. She has her knives. And Kaz has his glove and his cane. These keep us, they're very memorable things for the characters. But sometimes when we're creating character tags, at least for me, these quirks can feel arbitrary or awkward. I read a book once where the characters, like, the only thing about this character seemed to be that she hardly ever spoke, and she just said things like, she had like 3 key phrases. She said like, better quit, or just like kind of mumbled, and I thought it was a very lazy character development and unrealistic, and I really didn't like it as a reader, and I want to really avoid that as a writer. And so, while not all character tags need this level of detail that I'm about to deliver, I would suggest thinking of distinguishing quirks almost as like emotionally tied symbols, where the word symbol is like not a scary word. It's basically just kind of this. You introduce the tag, the thing that the character tends to do, the thing that the character has that is remarkable to them, an object, a tick, whatever, just kind of in their introduction as something that keeps the character memorable. So, for example, Kaz never takes off his gloves. It's either 2 gloves, I think it's 2 gloves, it might be 1 glove, but that might be Michael Jackson, so I think it's 2 gloves. That thing then, in step 2, is reinforced or given more context. So if they're using an object, like if they're using knives, you see them use them again. For Kaz, we learn that he can't stand the feeling of skin-to-skin contact and that the gloves protect him from that. That's kind of reinforced, given more context. And then the third thing is at a relevant, pivotal plot point, the emotional significance of that thing evolves. Hence, it's a symbol. So Kaz resents his reliance on the gloves when he wants to touch Inez. And when he finally takes them off, we understand that he's opening himself up to her. So our goal is to use these tags, quirks, whether you make them a fully-fledged symbol with those kind of 3 little baby symbol steps or not. The idea is to make them sort of emotionally resonate, to make them reveal things about the character and mark things along the character's arc. And I find thinking about that way really helps with character development instead of just being like, oh yeah, here's an arbitrary thing. All right, section 2, we're talking about plot advice next. So, the plot advice I hear all the time, and I do this, I follow this advice all the time, it's great advice, is write out your list of scenes. Making a scene card or a scene list can be very useful, but it can also feel impossible, arbitrary. You're gonna hear me saying the word arbitrary a lot because in my early writing life, I felt like everything was pretty damn arbitrary or overwhelming, especially if you're going from your idea or your pitch to your outline like directly. So here are 2 things to try instead of just writing out a list of scenes if you feel lost. These are things, again, that I have done and that I find useful. So the first one is to develop the core beats of your plot first. So in Save the Cat Writes a Novel, they identify foundational beats as the catalyst, the break into 2, the midpoint, the all is lost, and the break into 3. So you can start with these core beats and figuring out what they are, giving yourself kind of like a bird's eye view of the macro story, and making sure that it connects, making sure that it feels organic, making sure that you see the decisions that the character is making sure that you see how the character is changing along the way, illustrated by their decisions. And then you can delineate the rest of the beats or structure steps from there. So I think Save the Cat has, 15 beats. So you start with those core 5. You make sure that they make sense, they feel organic. You add the rest of them, you make sure that makes sense, they feel organic. And then when you're happy with that, you look at the remaining scenes to fill in the cause and effect, the setup, the relationship building, the emotion, or whatever it is that's needed to lead those beats between each other, if that makes sense. You can also do that with any structure you want, like hero's journey, whatever. A note here, pantsers might want to identify the 5 foundational beats and figure out the rest through discovery writing, or figure out those 15 beats and figure out the rest through discovery writing. That's awesome. You can do that too. And then my second idea here is, and I do this as well, is to identify your plot archetypes. So for example, and I will link to a video where I talk more about this, it's my Brandon Sanderson outlining video, you might have an information plot, a golden fleece plot, which is basically an adventure to find a MacGuffin, and a romance plot. So what I would do is I would write my plot archetypes down on kind of like the top of a page, and then under each one I would list all of the beats or milestones I need to hit. So in a mystery or information plot, I need the question to be posed, I need clues, I need red herrings, and I need a reveal. In a golden fleece, the character needs to be called to adventure, they need to make a plan, they need to execute the plan needs to go wrong, and in the end they need to get the MacGuffin. Or not. And then you weave these together. So once you know how each is going to unfold and what's needed for each of those storylines to be complete, then you look at them and you say, okay, how do I slot these together? How do I create scenes where I can accomplish multiple milestones from all the archetypes in one scene? The next one, now we're told this a lot, and I agree with this advice too. Push your characters to choose between impossible options. And this is maybe partially a sidebar, but every single craft book is like, make the choices hard. Make it like Sophie's choice. So we all love active characters. Active characters make hard choices. Do I fight or flee? Lie or tell the truth? Fight in a war or stay with my true love? The story grid philosophy calls it a best bad choice, or a choice between 2 irreconcilable goods. But so many craft books, so gosh darn many, use Sophie's choice as an example. And I know this is not really contradicting the writing advice because I agree with the writing advice, but I'm disagreeing with the example because it is a very, very bad example. Choosing which one of your children in the moment that you're going to let the Nazis kill is not a true choice. It's also not a story forward choice. That's like the climax of that thing. And the story isn't even really about that choice. It's about the emotional arc of the protagonist. I'm not going to go off on the tangent. We're coming back, but it doesn't further the theme. That choice doesn't further the theme. Whether she chooses the boy or the girl, it doesn't matter really in the arc of the story. Whether she chose either one, the result would be the same, right? She would still feel the same guilt. The story would still go as it is. The best choice when you're creating these choices for your characters, it requires characters to choose between values, such as love or freedom fighting. See Casablanca. Or personal freedom versus community safety. See politics. In Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, for example, Harry is asked to decide whether Sirius and Lupin kill Peter Pettigrew. It's a choice between revenge, in some ways justice in like a weird way, and like loyalty and righteousness. I really struggled what to call the value there because it's definitely not choosing compassion or kindness. But Harry says, I don't think my dad would have wanted his best friends to become murderers just for you. So he seems to be centering everything on the value that killing people is wrong, hence righteousness. In the end, he's choosing between revenge and justice versus loyalty and righteousness. You know, you could choose justice there. You would be justified in choosing justice, but he chooses the loyalty and the righteousness. You want there to be irreconcilable goods or best bad choice or just something that the character, it's not an easy decision for them to make, or it could be a hard decision, but the decisions have to represent different values. If you know what I mean? There has to be a sacrifice for either one. What are they choosing to sacrifice or to get each one versus like what are they choosing to gain? Sometimes I find that useful when coming up with these sort of choice situations is figuring out which values are figuring out what they have to give up in order to get each one versus thinking of what they will gain, because humans respond more, I guess it's like immediately to the threat of loss versus gaining something. Yeah, let's stop here. Okay, so those were 5 pieces of writing advice and alternatives that you might try instead. Let me know what you think. Is there any other popular writing advice that you don't follow and that you have an alternative for? Please let me know if you do in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.